for the Pentagon to reverse this decision later. Mr. Speaker, I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Blumenauer from Oregon.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
I appreciate the gentleman's courtesy, as I appreciate him bringing this amendment to the floor. I think it's telling that our friends in European NATO countries since 2008 have reduced their defense spending 12%. They're having tough times. They're retrenching. They recognize the new posture in terms of security. We should do the same thing. We should do the same thing. Absolutely. It's ironic that this chamber is going to be considering massive cuts in food stamps to have more responsibility and accountability. Some of us think are draconian. But for heaven's sakes, why can't we, 60 years after World War II, almost 25 years after the collapse of the former Soviet Union, can't we help Europe assume a little larger role for their own defense? For whom are these troops positioned in terms of some sort of military posture? I think most of us agree that it's highly unlikely they'll be used in combat. Any costs that would be incurred by accelerating it are money that's going to be spent anyway, notwithstanding all the costs to keep them there. So I think the gentleman is spot on. I'm happy to co-sponsor the amendment. I'm happy to speak in support of it. I hope this body approves it in a small way to help the Europeans assume their own responsibility and for us to be able to focus on things that are more important for us.
Will the gentleman yield? Would you explain, you say here you have these two brigades, except pursuant to Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. Could you explain what the impact of this is? The treaty commitments here.
Thank you, Mr. To the gentleman from Washington, I believe that this certainly does not disallow us to maintain rotational forces in Europe. There is no provision within the NATO Charter that requires the United States to maintain a permanent military presence in Europe.
It sounds as if it says none of the funds appropriated in this act shall be available to continue the deployment beyond fiscal year 2013 of the 117th Infantry Brigade in Baumholder and the 177th 2nd Infantry Brigade in Grafenwohr, except pursuant to Article 5 of the North. Is there some commitment in the North Atlantic Treaty that requires us to have these two brigades there?
To the gentleman from Washington, there is no requirement that where we have to maintain a permanent military presence in Europe.
Expired. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Washington.
I strike the requisite number of words.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. I believe that this amendment is unnecessary because the Department of Defense is currently in the process of reducing the number of troops in Europe. The Department has already announced the closure of Army garrisons in Schweinfurt, Bamberg, and Heidelberg by fiscal year 2015. Furthermore, the Department has begun the process of deactivating two infantry brigades, the 117th Infantry Brigade and the 172nd Infantry Brigade, each with 3,850 soldiers. I think this is what the gentleman intends. In addition, the U.S. Army in Europe will see a reduction of approximately 2,500 soldiers from enabling units over the next 5 years. Reducing end strength of any military service is an art form, as projecting future needs for future conflicts is a very difficult task. Reducing end strength should be part of a deliberate and thoughtful plan that incorporates current and future national security needs of the nation. I believe adding an arbitrary cap to the number of service members assigned to Europe could put our national security at risk. I urge all my colleagues to vote no on the amendment.
The gentleman yields back his time.
And I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Ohio.
I move to strike the requisite number of words.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in agreement with the ranking member on the issue of this amendment. You know, the subject matter of this amendment is really wholly inappropriate. It is the movement of brigades. From a policy perspective, we should not on this bill or on any bill be dictating the movement of brigades. Should we get out the map of the world and see where all of our brigades are and have a debate in Congress as to how they be moved about? No. That is something that is supposed to occur in consultation with the experts, in full and participation of the Department of Defense, the Secretary of Defense, and no disrespect to the authors, but they have no expertise or experience in how the positioning of our brigade should go for our overall national security. Mr. Kaufman has previously authored an amendment that was on the National Defense Authorization Act that used language of permit the reassignment or the removal of brigades. But this is directive. This says these brigades shall be moved. And it does so under the assumption that there will be cost savings. But we all know that when you actually move a brigade, there are a number of costs that are incurred that are greater than any savings that you would have in offset. You know, it's been said that the Soviet Union no longer exists. You're right, the Soviet Union no longer exists. But we have commitments in the Middle East, in our assistance to Africa, in our relationship with Israel. These troops are not there standing guard against the Soviet Union. That's not there anymore. They're in active deployment under the Secretary of Defense with the current threats that we have for our national security. And certainly, as the ranking member has indicated, there's ongoing assessments as to where these brigades should be assigned and where their responsibilities should be, and those should be left to our oversight of the Department of Defense and the Secretary of Defense, not to our directive of the moving of brigades. There's some concerns that even the language of this and the directing of movement of brigades, that it might be logistically implausible. That one of the reasons why we don't direct these things is because we don't have really the ability to understand all of the cascades of effects that occur. Now, I certainly understand the issue of a call for increased spending from our NATO partners. That is certainly something that this body, I think, should do. But in calling for our NATO partners to increase their participation in the expenditures of NATO in their own defense, we should not be directing the Secretary of Defense to actually move brigades and expertise we don't have in a debate that shouldn't be happening from a policy perspective on this floor. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. Gentleman from Oregon.
Strike the last word, Mr.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. It's rare that I disagree with my good friend from Ohio, but I do. I think that it's appropriate to move forward in this direction. As my good friend from the state of Washington indicated, we're probably going to do this by 2015, I think he mentioned. Right. The point here is this reassessment has been proceeding at a glacial speed. It's important for us to be on record to move this forward. There are major things that we're going to have to do. This is relatively small potatoes concerned with what we're going to have to do if we're going to meet our challenges, both in terms of a different security arrangement in terms of the threats that the United States faces, and our fiscal problems. Now, we've had this sitting on the back burner for years. We are, if anything, late to the party. And of course, as long as they are there, that is a disincentive for our NATO allies to step up and do what they need to do for their own defense. We have plenty of assets around the world. We have opportunities with naval and airstrikes. The notion that we're going to be throwing ground forces that are stationed in Europe into the fray in Israel or in some battle in Africa, I think is near-fetched at the least. They look at what we have done in the past and how we've gone about it. With all due respect, I think in a world where we have the capacity, as we have shown, to be able to stage and move troops when needed, this is a small step in the right direction. I think my friend from Ohio is overstating the case, and the notion that somehow it costs money to do the redeployment, so we should just keep them there. We're going to be redeploying them anyway, so the costs of redeployment are going to be incurred sometime this decade or sometime this century. but it costs money to keep them there. I have a nephew that makes a very good living teaching Americans in Europe in military schools. I think it's time for my nephew to come home and teach in the United States. I think there are more cost-effective ways for us to meet our security obligations, and I do think it's time for our European friends and allies to step up. We can no longer be paying almost half the defense costs of the world when many of the others in that mix are people who are our friends and allies. I think this is a small step in the right direction. I urge its adoption. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word for the purpose of entering into a colloquy with the gentleman from Florida.
Amendment yet. Could we finish this amendment?
Well, excuse me, I thought that I was told that this is...
Are you speaking on this subject?
Could you yield back and then say...
Does the gentleman from California withdraw his request?
Withdraw your request, yes, sir.
I withdraw my request,
It's
yes.
withdrawn. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment. Gentleman from Oregon.
On this, I would request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado will be postponed. What purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word to engage in a colloquy.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to thank Chairman Young and Ranking Member Dix for ensuring that this legislation would not include any reductions in the numbers of C-17s that are used in service by our armed services in the fiscal year 2013 Defense Appropriations Bill. The C-17 is the Air Force's premier strategic transport aircraft and remains the military's most reliable and capable airlift aircraft. The C-17 flies more than 80% of all the U.S. airlift missions, while comprising of only 60% of the airlift fleet. The C-17 is proven capable delivery of more than cargo, troops, and non-war humanitarian missions than any other aircraft that we have. Mr. Chairman, this aircraft was instrumental in saving lives during the devastating earthquake and tsunami that struck in Japan last year, and in addition to that, humanitarian efforts that I witnessed personally in Samoa, the delivery of 10,005 tons of disaster relief supplies, and carried 13,812 passengers in response to the earthquake that struck Haiti in 2010. In 2009, I worked with Congressman Eni Falamavega to help get disaster relief supplies to American Samoa after an earthquake and tsunami that ravaged that island. The 10-day relief mission was conducted with the C-17 aircraft. The C-17 provides rapid response and capability for relief missions anywhere in the world, including and not limited to serving those who serve us. Mr. Chairman, I also want to mention, though, that in addition to these humanitarian efforts, the C-17 leads in positive economic benefits to our country. The C-17 is built in Long Beach, California, where I happen to have the privilege to represent with my colleague, Mr. Rohrabacher. The production of the C-17 is responsible for over 13,000 jobs in California and provides $2 billion in economic benefit. Nationally, the production of the C-17 has suppliers in 44 states, all of which we represent here, supports more than 30,000 jobs, and has an $8.4 billion economic impact. While we're looking for ways to rein in spending, the C-17 remains critical to our national security, our humanitarian relief missions, and our economy. My effort today is to make sure that we have adequate number of C-17s that are available, serviced, and maintained for our armed forces. Will the Chairman and Ranking Member continue to work with me to ensure that there is a sufficiently and well-maintained fleet of our C-17s in our armed services? I yield to the gentleman.
Gentlelady yield. I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I thank her for her strong support of the C-17, and she's right on. The vital role it plays in our nation's defense. This committee has been a strong advocate for the C-17. Our bill fully funds the C-17 and ensures that no action can be taken by the Air Force to reduce the C-17 fleet. I again thank the gentlewoman for her very timely comments on this important issue, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from California.
Would you yield to me?
Yes, sir.
I have been a very strong proponent of the C-17, even when Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach was building this airplane. I've had a chance to go there when they were doing the wooden mock-ups, and when they brought in the people who the load masters who made it such that the plane was built in a way that it can load cargo faster than any other airplane in history. And we have 54 of these at Joint Base Lewis-McChord in the great state of Washington. We're very proud of the C-17. It's now built by the Boeing company. And I just want you to know that we're a very strong proponent. We had some great work done in the 1990s in upgrading the software. We had major software issues, but we had also dramatic workforce out there that really used all the tools of lean production. So C-17 is a very high priority, and we will certainly do everything we can. I wish we were going to build more of them, frankly, while we had the line open, but we did everything we could, but we're at a point now where the line is closing down, except for foreign sales, and I hope we have a number of foreign sales, and if at some point we need to come back to it, I certainly would be open to that.
I thank Chairman Young and also Ranking Member Dix for their response and their commitment to this program. Yes, in fact, we have been utilizing foreign sales, and given the current occupations in this country, we stand ready to continue to build them to protect this country. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, it is fortuitous now that I would strike the last word for the purpose of entering into a colloquy with the gentleman from Florida on an issue that deals directly with the C-17.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today to voice my concern over recent and devastating wildfires that have enveloped massive amounts of land throughout our country. The ruin caused by these wildfires have consumed 2.5 million acres and destroyed over 1,600 homes and killed 7 people and threatened many more. This reoccurring problem is caused by, yes, dry conditions, hot weather, and ample fuel, and it tests the limits of our current federal, state, and local firefighting resources. When homes and lives are on the line, I believe we should take all possible action to protect the lives and property of our people, including the deployment of Air National Guard and Air Reserve resources when appropriate. We oftentimes think that the Department of Defense is entirely should be aimed at defending our nation against foreign foes. But the fact is that there are enormous resources held by the Department of Defense, such as cargo planes, that are capable of assisting in many other efforts, including firefighting efforts, which threaten the lives and property of our people. For example, one specific concept named Precision Container Aerial Delivery Systems, or PCADS, needs only an additional $2.6 million in funding to complete an already many years evaluation of this technology. Unfortunately, however, the DoD has not committed this meager sum to finish evaluating PCADS despite the authority to do so. What are PCADS? They essentially allow any military cargo plane that has a ramp in the back, namely our C-17s and our C-130s, to assist in wildfire efforts without having to modify the airplane at all. This means the C-17s and the C-130s which we have right now, many stationed all over the country, could be deployed to help extinguish wildfires at relatively low cost, creating new and enormous firefighting capabilities, as I say, at a minimal cost. This makes, basically what we're talking about is a huge and a container system in the back that is made out of cardboard and a water balloon, which will permit putting onto the C-17 and the C-130s, just rolling right on 1,000 pounds of water per container. And these C-130 pilots and C-17 pilots are already trained to drop these things, and they, without modifying the airplane, could become an enormous resource to fighting fires throughout our country without having any extra cost after this $2.5 million for the final test. I therefore have one request. To the extent that the Department of Defense is capable in exploring new and innovative, cost-effective and promising firefighting and other technologies that can be used for our civilian population, but especially for the firefighting capabilities, that can aid and support, as I say, firemen's requests throughout our country and from the state and federal level, I urge the Department of Defense to do so to the degree that it can. And I now would like to yield to the distinguished chairman, the gentleman from Florida.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman for yielding and bringing this to our attention and for supporting innovative and cost-effective ways for our government to protect our people and their possessions from wildfires. I too believe the Department of Defense should seriously consider promising and cost-effective firefighting technologies where appropriate.
That yield to me?
Yes, I would. Yes, sir.
This has been a subject that I have been very interested in as former chairman of the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, where we have to fund the efforts for firefighting, which are very massive. And I have tried to work with the Defense Department. The biggest problem we face is at OMB. When you want to lease these airplanes, either and we're looking mainly at the C-130J here, to lease them for firefighting purposes and then have them deployed with the National Guard in California or somewhere on the West Coast. You get into the fact if you try to lease them, they want to take the budget control people want to put the whole burden on the first year. And this is why leasing has become difficult. So we've got to work out a way to make it, to get these airplanes.
This is, if I'm reclaiming my time, this is the way.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I move to strike the requisite number of words.
Gentleman from California's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to the gentleman from California.
In the past, in order to achieve the goal that you have outlined, we needed to reconfigure the inside of these C-130s and have special C-130s deployed. This new PCAD system, which we can roll on enormous amounts of water into in these little container systems, well, it's 1,000 pounds per water per container, can be dropped without reconfiguring the C-130s or the C-17s.
Well, I am very interested in this. I want to talk to my good friend about this, and would like to work with you on it.
One last note, if the gentleman would yield.
I yield.
We're only talking, there's been a series of tests to show this is very effective. One more series of tests will cost $2.6 million, and we can deploy these, and I believe it will increase the value of our asset, of our C-130s and C-17s, to the point that we can actually maybe charge a little bit more money when we sell the C-17s, which will be far more than the $2.6 million for this final test. So it'll almost pay, it will pay for itself, not to mention the property damage we can protect against as well.
Well, I look forward to working with the gentleman on this issue.
Thank you very much.
The gentleman from Washington yields back his time. Who seeks recognition?
The last word in a colloquy.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Chairman Young and Ranking Member Dix for including language in the conference report that recognizes the importance of increasing the fair opportunity for numbers of women and minorities in officer positions and within the Special Operations Forces. Minorities and women to have an opportunity to fairly compete, and I stress compete, are often underrepresented in the leadership ranks within our armed services. African Americans account for 12% of the U.S. population, but just 8% of active duty officers. Likewise, when it comes to Hispanic Americans, it's even worse. Hispanics make up 15% of the U.S. population, but number only 5% of officers in our Corps. While the number of women in officer positions have seen increases, there's still a lack of women in top officer positions. In 2009, there were 40 individuals who held the highest rank in our armed services. And, Mr. Chairman, when we ask how many of those were women, I'm sad to say just 1 out of 40. This shows that there is considerable room for improvement, and having served on the Transportation Committee with Mr. Cummings, much work was done on the Coast Guard side, but really should be equal throughout the armed forces. I was planning on offering an amendment to the Defense Appropriations Bill that would make it explicit that it is the sense of Congress that efforts should be made to increase the number of women and minorities in officer positions, but it would be subject to a point of order. However, I've worked with Chairman Young and his staff that going forward we would continue to look at ways to increase women and minorities within the leadership ranks and to give them an opportunity, again, to compete for fair positions. Chairman Young, will you continue to work with me on this very important issue? And I yield to the Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I thank her for calling attention to the fact that the subcommittee in our report said that it is an issue worthy of attention. And our language in the report said, urges the services and specifically our Special Operations Forces to conduct effective outreach and recruitment programs to minority populations to improve diversity in the military. So absolutely, we agree with you totally. That is the intent of our committee. That becomes the intent of the Congress. And we will continue to work with you to make sure that we do better at every opportunity. And I thank you for raising this issue today.
I thank the gentleman for his response, his commitment, and his leadership on this issue.
Will the gentlelady yield?
Yes, sir.
I want the gentlelady to know that we worked with Mr. Young on a number of insertions of report language in the report because of our concern about this issue as well. This is something where we always have to be vigilant because the people kind of forget what the legal responsibilities are, and these are statutory responsibilities. And so I appreciate the gentlelady from California bringing this to our attention. We'll work with her on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Ranking Member Dix. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from California yields back her time. Who seeks recognition? What purpose does the gentleman from North Dakota seek recognition?
Well, I have an amendment.
The amendment will be read.
Amendment offered by Mr. Berg of North Dakota. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to reduce the number of the following nuclear weapons delivery vehicles of the United States. 1. Heavy bomber aircraft. 2. Air-launched cruise missiles. 3. Nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. 4. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles. 5. Intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Berg, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I have the distinct honor to represent several military installations in my state of North Dakota, including the Minot Air Force Base, the home of the 91st Missile Wing, and the 5th Bomber Wing, which relates to the amendment I have to offer today. The amendment which I offer today, along with my colleagues, Ms. Lummis and Representative Mr. Denny Rehberg from Montana, it's very straightforward. It prohibits the fiscal year 13 funds from being used to implement plans under the New START Treaty to reduce the number of nuclear weapons and their delivery system, which significantly reduces America's ability to develop and use our nuclear defense capabilities. We all know that during the 2010 lame duck session, the Senate ratified the New START Treaty, and President Obama made a promise to Congress that as long as he was president, we will continue to invest in nuclear modernization. Mr. Chairman, since then, he has backed away from his promise, and we all heard the President's unsettling off-mic comments that he would have more flexibility after the November elections. The treaty provides for 7 years for the United States and Russia to reduce the number of deployed ICBMs, deployed submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and deployed heavy bomber equipped to carry nuclear armaments, to no more than 700 weapons. I know that many of us may not agree on the appropriate level of deployed nuclear weapons or our view on the New START treaty. However, we need to make one thing clear. Nowhere in the New START treaty does it require reductions from the United States to make these cuts prior to fiscal year or during fiscal year 2013. Furthermore, we're still waiting on the administration to tell us exactly how sharp the cuts in our deployed nuclear weapons could be under the New START treaty. The Associated Press has reported the Obama administration is going beyond the level laid out in the New START treaty and is considering as much as an 80% reduction in our current nuclear arsenal. It appears that the administration is planning drastic cuts to our nuclear arsenal and could be planning to move away from our nuclear triad strategy altogether. All three legs of our nation's nuclear triad are complementary to the defense of our nation. Drastic cuts in our overall level of our nation's nuclear arsenal puts our national security at risk, and sharp reductions in any one leg of the nuclear triad would destabilize a sound defense strategy. Therefore, since the President made an agreement to modernize our arsenal and Congress is still waiting to hear what those specifics are, Congress should not provide funding to facilitate these reductions. I urge adoption of these amendments, and I yield my time. I do.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank him very much for bringing up this issue. I believe that the Berg Amendment recognizes the world as it really is, the threats that we potentially face. And I think he has done the Congress a real service today by emphasizing this issue with his amendment, and I support his amendment.
Thank you.
It's time. Gentleman from Washington.
I rise in opposition to this amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
The New START treaty limits the total number of nuclear weapon delivery vehicles by 2017. According to the Air Force, they are funded for New START implementation, but are awaiting final force structure decisions to determine numbers of weapons delivery vehicles to be reduced in FY13. We should carry out our obligation under the New START treaty and not restrict the Department's obligation to implement it. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment. And I want to make it clear to my colleagues just what we're talking about. Today we have 520 ICBMs with 420 warheads. We have 60 bombers, 42 B-52s, and 18 B-2s that are nuclear capable, and they have many warheads. We have 240 sub-launch missiles, and the number of subs are not restricted. But we have 14 Trident submarines. And I would, with all due respect, just say this. This is one area where we can, if we can come down in a mutual agreement with the Russians to a lower level, we can save ourselves the money of not having to replace all of these weapon systems. And a lot of very thoughtful people have looked at this issue, and they believe that the two most survivable legs of the triad are the ballistic missile submarines and the bombers. The land-based missiles are vulnerable. Now, when we had the great debates over the MX missile, we got into how many RVs coming in to take out an existing missile, and usually it's 2. So the enemy would be using up weapons. The point of it all is, the last thing that we're going to be using is nuclear weapons. It just is not going to happen. It would destroy the world, and so we can come down to a lower level and still have a credible deterrent. We can't afford to do everything. And the most important thing today, I think, is to build up our special forces, build up our intelligence capability, and to look at the threats that we're facing out there with al-Qaeda and the terrorists. And frankly, nuclear weapons are a relic of the Cold War, and we should bring down the size of this. General Cartwright, one of the most thoughtful former members of the Joint Chiefs, has suggested that we go to a duat of just having ballistic missile submarines and bombers. That's something that we should consider. The Markey Amendment would have started us in a way of reducing the number of land-based missiles. But I just think it's not right for us to get in the middle of this. The Senate had long hearings. They went through a process of ratification. This treaty was ratified by the United States Senate. And again, I just think if there's one area where we can make some reductions, it's in the area of nuclear weapons. We're just not going to need as many as we've had in the past, and we can have great deterrence at a lower level. And I hope we can reach that. And I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Wyoming seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentlewoman from Wyoming is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to work with Representative Berg on this amendment, which will protect our nuclear triad from the reduction scheduled under this treaty for the term of this 2013 budget year. Each leg of our nuclear triad, bombers, submarines, and land-based missiles, complement each other, and they strengthen each other. As a lifelong resident of southeast Wyoming, I've come to understand and appreciate the role of our intercontinental ballistic missiles. The 90th Missile Wing in Cheyenne keeps 150 of our ICBMs at nearly 100% alert. The bombers and subs have their own unique strengths, but no other leg of the triad comes close to this alert level. The constant alert, wide geographic dispersion, and immediate global response capability of our ICBMs make them an indispensable part of our triad. ICBMs are the most cost-effective leg of the triad as well. At less than $3 million per ICBM, they are less than a third the cost of a sub-launched missile or a nuclear bomber. It's because of the ICBMs that we can say with confidence that we are fielding a nearly unbeatable nuclear force. Those that want to slash our nuclear force forget that it was American strength that ended the Cold War. It was American strength, including the Peacekeeper and Minuteman III missiles, that allowed us to negotiate landmark reductions in American and Russian nuclear arsenals. Remember, we were able to retire the Peacekeeper missile silos in Wyoming. It was a victory for global stability, but we did it through American strength, not through unilateral disarmament. That's what makes the New START treaty so troubling. It is bilateral in name only. The United States bound itself to unilateral reductions in strategic nukes, but Russia can still expand its strategic arsenal. Russia can stack their bombers to the hilt with warheads and call it a single delivery vehicle. Russia can deploy an unlimited number of the tactical nuclear weapons under which they hold an advantage. Russia can develop new long-range nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. With New START, we negotiated away American strength and received little in return. It is dangerous to assume that our nuclear competitors have the same motives and ideals that we do. If we roll over and capitulate to the demands of our competitors, we cannot assume that Russia, China, and Iran will follow. But if we maintain our strength and our unbeatable nuclear posture, we will be far more effective at securing the peace that we all want. Again, I want to thank Representative Berg and Mr. Rehberg. I encourage you to vote against unilateral disarmament. Vote for our amendment. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman from Wyoming yields back her time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yes, I seek recognition in opposition to the Berg Amendment.
Does the gentleman move to strike the last word?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. You know, this debate has taken on the characteristics of ancestor worship, and I understand it. I know it's hard for individuals to let go of the Cold War, to let go of an era where foreign policy was characterized by this bitter rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The reality, we won. It's over. And we didn't just win, it was basically a world where there's unipower now. It's us. The Chinese only have 40 to 50 nuclear missiles. The Russians have already dramatically reduced their weapons. The likelihood of a nuclear war between the United States and Russia is -0. And yet there are members that don't want to see any reductions in our nuclear weapons force, notwithstanding the fact that those extra expenditures then would have to come out of other budgets, including the budgets for the National Institutes of Health to find the cure for cancer or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And so we have this, curious disconnect between the reality of the world that we live in today and the understandable but erroneous commitment that many members on the other side have to a relic of a Cold War era rivalry that no longer can withstand fiscal scrutiny. So let's just take this debate about whether or not the United States is vulnerable. Each one of our submarine-based nuclear weapon systems have 96 independently targetable warheads on board. That is, each one of our sub-commanders can destroy the 96 biggest cities in China. Each one of our sub-commanders can destroy the 96 biggest cities in Russia. Each sub-commander with their first nuclear weapon could destroy Tehran. Each sub-commander could destroy Pyongyang and still have 95 independently targetable nuclear weapons on board that one submarine, much less every other submarine that we have out there. And so to have an amendment that says after New START was agreed to between Russia and the United States, after the Air Force and the Navy signed off on New START, to have members of the House proposing that notwithstanding that agreement that was reached, that does enhance American national security by reducing the likelihood that there would be a conflict between the United States and Russia, as low as that likelihood is, that we have this micromanagement that comes in of our military. But you know what? It's more than that. Let's admit it. It's all about jobs. You're thinking about the defense bill as a jobs bill, and I understand that. But whenever we're talking about the defense bill, those jobs that are created should relate in some way to American national security. And what the Air Force and the Navy are saying is that They do not believe they need more nuclear weapons. In fact, they can agree to and have already accepted the reduction in nuclear weapons that is in the New START Treaty. And so I understand from a jobs perspective why you want to lock in jobs that may have been created a generation ago in the height of the Cold War. But we have to redeploy for the 21st century, not only militarily, but also into what strengthens us domestically in terms of medical research and educational programs. So I can't really understand why we're even debating this issue. There is a treaty between our two countries. Our military has signed off. Our military says it actually enhances our nuclear, our security. And I agree with the gentleman from Washington State. You know, this is an area where we should actually give some respect to the United States Senate that ratified the treaty, to each one of our Joint Chiefs that signed off on it, and not allow a jobs bill to trump our national security. That if you can find programs that actually enhance our security and you want to spend the money on it, let's debate that. But this is an area that is already resolved. I urge a no vote on the Berg amendment.
The gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks recognition? Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Dakota. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Dakota will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word and to engage in a colloquy with the ranking member of the committee.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking the gentleman from Washington and Chairman Young for accommodating my request for the second year in a row for an additional $20 million to be included in the appropriations bill for suicide prevention and outreach programs. The committee last year honored this request, and I think it's a clear demonstration of the committee's intent that the Department do more and more to end this epidemic of suicide among our active duty, Guard, and Reserve force. I do have a clarifying question I'd like to pose to the gentleman from Washington. Is it the committee's intent that the $20 million in this legislation in additional suicide prevention funds be made available for successful suicide prevention programs such as New Jersey's Vets for Warriors peer-to-peer counseling and outreach program?
Will the gentleman yield?
I would be pleased to yield to the gentleman from Washington.
I can assure the gentleman from New Jersey that the committee intends to fund those programs that most effectively minimize suicides. And I'd point out that in most of these situations, this money is going to be competitively awarded, but I'm sure that the gentleman's New Jersey program will compete very well.
I thank the gentleman. And I'd also like to ask unanimous consent or under general leave for the chair to insert in the record a letter from the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the Disabled American Veterans, AMVETS, and the Marine Corps League, a letter to Secretary Panetta concerning this Vets for Warriors program.
The gentleman's request is indeed covered by general leave.
I thank the chairman. In this letter, the five veteran service organizations note that of all the suicide prevention programs and alternatives explored by the department, quote, perhaps none have been more successful than the Vets for Warriors program, end quote. And I raise this letter, Mr. Chairman, because just this past week, the National Academies of Science released a report on the DoD and the VA's response to this explosion of PTSD cases and suicide-related mental health problems for veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And we want to make sure that the successful programs are recognized. And to date, no service member or veteran who has used these Vets for Warriors or Vets to Vet program
has taken his or her own life. They have been successful. One of the shortcomings in our government's approach to dealing with the suicide epidemic among service members and veterans is the assumption that only programs within the DoD and within the VA are capable of dealing with this crisis. And our experience in New Jersey strongly suggests otherwise. And I ask the gentleman from Washington and the chair of the committee for their help in prodding the national academies and the government at large in evaluating the potential positive role of the community-based programs like the Vets for Warriors, the role that they can play in helping defeat the suicide epidemic among our troops and veterans.
Will the gentleman yield?
I would yield.
The gentleman from New Jersey has my assurance we will work with him on this issue, and I would just say that our chairman has been a great leader on this issue. No one has done more than Bill Young on this, and I look forward to working with him and trying to make sure that this program is completely and thoroughly evaluated by the Army, by the National Guard, and by the VA.
Will the gentleman yield?
And I would yield to the gentleman from Florida.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, and I appreciate the comments of Mr. Dix, our former chairman, and would say that I agree strongly with him, as I do most of the time. We have a great history of working together for many, many years, and we will be very happy to work together with you on this issue because it is a very, very important concern to all of us and to all the members of our committee, and I know to all the members of this House of Representatives. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
And reclaiming my time, I would reiterate my thanks to the chairman and to the ranking member for the strong attention and sensitive attention that they have given to this matter. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Time. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Flores of Texas. At the end of the bill, before the short title, add the following new section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to enforce Section 526 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, Public Law 110-140, 42 U.S.C. 17142.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise to offer an amendment which addresses another misguided and restrictive federal regulation. Section 526 of the Energy Independence and Security Act prevents federal agencies from entering into contracts for the procurement of fuels unless their life cycle greenhouse gas emissions are less than or equal to emissions from an equivalent conventional fuel produced from conventional petroleum sources. The initial purpose of Section 526 was to stop the Defense Department's plans to buy and develop coal-based or coal-to-liquid jet fuel. This restriction was based on the opinion of some environmentalists that coal-based jet fuel might produce more greenhouse gas emissions than traditional petroleum-derived fuels. My amendment is a simple fix, and that fix is to not restrict our fuel choices based on extreme environmental views, bad policies, and misguided regulations like those in Section 526. Placing limits on federal agencies' fuel choices is an unacceptable precedent to set in regard to America's policy, petroleum independence, and our national security. Mr. Chair, Section 526 restrictions make our nation more dependent on unstable Middle Eastern oil. Stopping the impact of Section 526 will help us promote American energy, improve the American economy, and create American jobs. In addition, and probably most importantly, we must ensure that our military has adequate fuel resources and that it can rely on domestic and more stable sources of fuel. With increasing competition for energy and fuel resources, and with the continued volatility and instability in the Middle East, it is now more important than ever for our country to become more energy independent and to further develop and produce all of our domestic energy resources. In some circles, there is a misconception that my amendment somehow prevents the federal government and our military from being able to produce and use alternative fuels. Mr. Chair, this viewpoint is categorically false. All my amendment does is to allow federal purchasers, particularly our military, to be able to acquire the fuels that best and most efficiently meet their needs. I offered a similar amendment to the CJS Appropriations Bill for FY 2013, and it passed with strong bipartisan support. My identical amendments to 4 other FY 2013 appropriations bills also each passed by voice vote. My friend Mr. Conaway also had language added to the Defense Authorization Bill to exempt the Defense Department from this burdensome regulation. Let's remember the following problems with Section 526. 1, it increases our reliance on unstable Middle Eastern oil. 2, it hurts our military readiness, our national security, and our energy security. 3, it prevents the increased use of some sources of safe, clean, and efficient American oil and gas. 4, it hurts American jobs and the American economy. 5, last and certainly not least, it costs our taxpayers more of their hard-earned dollars. My amendment fixes those problems, and I urge my colleagues to support the passage of this common-sense amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, move to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everyone in this House would sleep much easier at night if our airplanes flew on sunbeams and our ships steamed on rainbows. But they don't. They use diesel. And diesel they must have if they're to continue to protect this nation. I rise today in strong support of this amendment to lift the restrictions on the military's procurement of alternative fuels enshrined in Section 526 of the Energy Independence and Security Act. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Mr. Flores and Mr. Hensling, for their work with me on this issue. Section 526 prohibits the military from purchasing alternative fuels products that have life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, mouthful, that are less than or equal to such emissions from conventional fuel. Mr. Speaker, this prohibition makes no sense to me. Several months ago, Secretary of the Navy Mavis said, "Our dependence on foreign sources of fossil fuel is rife with danger for our nation, and it would be irresponsible to continue it. Paying for spikes in oil prices means that we may have less money to spend on readiness, which includes procurement. We could be using that money for more hardware and more platforms. If protecting fuel lines and avoiding price volatility are truly the goals of the military, and I do believe that these are worthy objectives, then lifting the restrictions imposed by Section 526 should be a no-brainer. Section 526 puts technology like coal to liquids, gas to liquids, oil shale, oil sands out of reach of the United States military. These technologies are capable of meeting the Department's objectives for safeguarding production and reducing price volatility, and in most cases are far more advanced than the exotic biofuels projects that the Navy is currently pursuing. This amendment will offer us a stark choice. The military can meet its strategic fuel concerns, or operational planning can take a back seat to environmental posturing. Many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will spend their time talking about how dirty fuel derived from coal or liquids or oil sand technology is. They'll offer up and knock down straw men dealing with global warming and carbon footprints. But what they will not talk about is the critical need for our Department of Defense to procure the cheapest, most readily available fuels that supplies its strategic requirements. I offer my full-throated endorsement for the Department's work to increase its energy efficiency, to reduce the need for fuel convoys, and to limit vulnerabilities in the fuel supply chain. However, those aren't the issues that we're dealing with this amendment. The question this amendment asks is it appropriate for Congress to continue to prohibit the military from purchasing certain domestically available synthetic fuels? The Department of Defense singular objective is to protect this nation. Department of Defense leaders have made it clear that foreign sources of oil and price volatility present an obstacle to fulfilling that obligation. Lifting the restrictions contained in Section 526 will free the military to utilize any technology it believes will help and to confront that danger. I urge my colleagues to join me to lift this irresponsible prohibition and provide the military with the options it needs to manage the long-term strategic risks facing our nations. I thank my good friend for offering this amendment and look forward to its passage. And I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to support this very, very popular amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Flores offered the same amendment to each fiscal year 2012 appropriations bill, and all were accepted by a voice vote. Also, each fiscal year 2013 appropriations bill that have already passed the House include this amendment. All passed by voice vote, with the exception of CJS, which had a roll call and a positive vote of over 250 votes yes. 15 Democrats supported the amendment. Mr. Conaway offered an amendment to the FY13 Armed Services Committee bill, which has the same effect. The amendment was accepted into the House bill. Now, this obviously is a very popular amendment, and I'm happy to be supportive of it.
Back is time. Gentleman from California. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
For the purposes of supporting the amendment.
Gentleman, you can have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Question to the author of the amendment and to those who are supporting it on the other side. In listening to your discussion, you seem to